Night falls over Tehran. The city is quiet at first, the distant hum of traffic, the glow of lights stretching across the capital of nearly 10 million people. Then, the explosions begin. Sirens cut through the darkness as missiles strike compounds linked to Iran's leadership. Windows shatter, columns of smoke rise into the night sky. Within minutes, emergency channels across the country erupt with urgent messages. Something extraordinary has just happened. At the center of the chaos lies the most heavily protected compound in Iran, the residence of the country's supreme leader. For more than 3 decades, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei ruled Iran as the most powerful figure in the Islamic Republic. Presidents came and went, governments changed, but his authority remained absolute. Now, in the aftermath of the strike, reports begin spreading through Iran's political elite. The supreme leader is dead. Inside the halls of power, one question suddenly becomes unavoidable. Who will lead Iran now? And in the quiet, guarded conversations between generals, clerics, and intelligence officials, one name begins to surface again and again: Mojtaba Khamenei. To understand why this moment is so dangerous for Iran, you have to understand one thing. In the Islamic Republic, the most powerful person in the country is not the president. It is the supreme leader. Since the revolution of 1979, this position has stood at the very top of Iran's political system. The supreme leader commands the armed forces. He appoints the heads of the judiciary. He controls state television and radio, and he holds ultimate authority over the country's security services. Even Iran's elected government operates beneath him. Presidents may run the day-to-day affairs of the state. Parliaments may pass laws. But when the supreme leader speaks, the system listens. For more than 30 years, that authority belonged to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He oversaw wars in the Middle East, economic crises, nuclear negotiations, and waves of protest at home. Through it all, his position remained the central pillar holding Iran's political system together. Now that pillar is gone. And replacing a supreme leader is not just a political decision. It is a moment that can reshape the future of an entire nation. In moments like this, Iran does have a process. The country's constitution says that a body known as the Assembly of Experts, a council of senior clerics, must choose the next supreme leader. In theory, the decision should fall to one of Iran's most respected religious authorities, a senior cleric with decades of public leadership. But almost immediately after the strike, another possibility begins to circulate inside Iran's political establishment, a name that had long existed in the background of Iranian politics: Mojtaba Khamenei, the second son of the late supreme leader. For years, Mojtaba has remained one of the most mysterious figures in the Islamic Republic. He has never run for political office. He rarely appears in public. Many Iranians have never heard his voice in a speech or sermon, and yet, inside the inner circles of power, his influence has been whispered about for decades. Clerics, commanders in the Revolutionary Guard, and political insiders have often described him as a man with quiet but significant authority, someone who helped manage access to the supreme leader himself. Now, with his father suddenly gone, those quiet rumors have taken on a new and much more serious meaning. Because if Mojtaba Khamenei truly becomes the next supreme leader, Iran could be on the verge of something it once promised to abolish forever: a political dynasty. To understand Mojtaba Khamenei, you have to go back to the years when the Islamic Republic itself was still young. He was born in 1969, during the final decade of the Shah's rule. At the time, Iran was still a monarchy, governed by Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. But within a few years, the country would be transformed by one of the most dramatic revolutions of the 20th century. In 1979, the Shah was overthrown. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile, and the Islamic Republic of Iran was born. For the young Mojtaba, this revolution was not a distant political event. It unfolded inside his own family. His father, Ali Khamenei, had been part of the revolutionary movement from the beginning. A cleric deeply involved in the struggle against the monarchy, he quickly rose within the new system after the revolution succeeded. As Mojtaba grew up, His father's influence inside the Islamic Republic continued to expand, first as a senior revolutionary figure, then as president during the turbulent years of the Iran-Iraq War. And eventually, in 1989, Ali Khamenei became the supreme leader of Iran. From that moment on, Mojtaba Khamenei was no longer simply the son of a cleric. He was the son of the most powerful man in the country. As Mojtaba Khamenei entered adulthood, Iran was already locked in one of the most brutal conflicts in its modern history. In 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran, launching a war that would last 8 devastating years. Cities were bombed, entire generations of young men were sent to the front, and the survival of the new Islamic Republic was constantly in doubt. For many young Iranians, the war became a defining experience. Among them was Mojtaba Khamenei. During the conflict, he reportedly served with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the military force created after the revolution to defend the new regime. The IRGC quickly became far more than a conventional army. It developed into a powerful institution that blended military strength, political influence, and ideological loyalty to the revolution. Within its ranks, friendships formed during the war often lasted a lifetime. For Mojtaba, those years were crucial. Fighting alongside members of the Revolutionary Guard meant building relationships with the very men who would later rise to become commanders, intelligence chiefs, and senior figures within Iran's security apparatus. Decades later, the IRGC would grow into one of the most powerful forces in the country, controlling vast economic interests and playing a decisive role in Iran's regional strategy. And many of the men leading it would remember the young cleric who had once stood beside them during the war. Those early connections would quietly become one of the foundations of Mojtaba Khamenei's influence inside the Islamic Republic. After the war ended in 1988, Iran entered a new phase. The country was rebuilding. The revolution was no longer young, and the generation that had fought to establish the Islamic Republic was now firmly in control of it. It was during these years that Mojtaba Khamenei began shaping the path that would define the rest of his life. Like many sons of clerical families, he pursued religious studies in the seminaries of Qom, the spiritual center of Shiite scholarship in Iran. There, he studied theology, Islamic law, and the political philosophy that underpins the Islamic Republic. Over time, he reached the rank of Hojjatul Islam, a mid-level clerical title. But unlike many religious scholars, Mojtaba did not build his reputation through public sermons or political campaigns. He stayed almost entirely out of the spotlight. There were no major speeches broadcast on state television, no public political career, no visible role in government ministries. Instead, Mojtaba's influence appeared to grow in a different way. Inside Iran's political circles, he became known as someone who could quietly shape access to the supreme leader himself. Officials, commanders, and clerics seeking meetings with Ali Khamenei often found that the path to the supreme leader's office passed through his son. Over time, this quiet position gave Mojtaba something few people in Iran possessed: proximity to the center of power. And in the Islamic Republic, proximity to power can sometimes be just as important as holding power itself. In the summer of 2009, Iran faced one of the most dramatic political crises since the revolution. The country was holding a presidential election. On the ballot were several candidates, but the race quickly centered on two men: the incumbent president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, a hardline conservative known for his confrontational rhetoric, and his main challenger, Mir Hossein Mousavi, a former prime minister who had become the symbol of Iran's reform movement. For weeks, the campaign electrified the country. Millions of Iranians followed televised debates, packed rallies, and political discussions that seemed to suggest the system might be opening to change. Then, on the night of June 12th, the results were announced. According to official figures, Ahmadinejad had won a landslide victory, receiving nearly 2/3 of the vote. Almost immediately, accusations of fraud erupted. Mousavi and other opposition figures claimed the election had been manipulated. Supporters poured into the streets of Tehran and other major cities, demanding answers. What began as demonstrations quickly grew into something much larger. Within days, hundreds of thousands of people were marching through the capital wearing green, the color of Mousavi's campaign. The movement soon became known simply as the Green Movement. At its peak, millions of Iranians took part in protests across the country, challenging the legitimacy of the election and calling for greater political freedom. For the leadership of the Islamic Republic, it was a moment of profound danger. The largest wave of protests the country had seen in decades, and a direct challenge to the authority of the system itself. At first, the protests were largely peaceful. Crowds filled the streets of Tehran carrying banners, chanting slogans, and demanding that the election results be reviewed. Many believed the demonstrations might force the government to reconsider the outcome. But inside Iran's leadership, the protests were seen very differently. To the authorities, this was not simply a political dispute. It was a direct threat to the survival of the Islamic Republic. Within days, the state began to respond with force. Security units from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps moved into major cities. Alongside them came the Basij, a paramilitary volunteer force known for its loyalty to the regime. Motorcycles roared through the streets as Basij members confronted protesters. Demonstrations were broken up with batons, tear gas, and arrests. Television channels showed little of the unrest. Independent journalists were detained. Internet connections slowed or were cut entirely. By the end of the summer, the movement that had once filled Iran's streets was largely suppressed. During these events, opposition figures and reformist politicians began pointing to one man they believed was playing a role behind the scenes: Mojtaba Khamenei. Critics within the reformist camp accused him of helping coordinate the response to the protests and working closely with security forces to ensure the demonstrations were crushed. Those allegations were never publicly confirmed by the authorities. But from that moment on, Mojtaba's name became permanently tied to one of the most controversial chapters in modern Iranian politics. After the protests of 2009 were suppressed, Iran's political landscape changed. For the leadership of the Islamic Republic, the Green Movement had been a warning. It showed how quickly dissatisfaction could spread through the country and how fragile political stability could become. From that point on, the system grew more cautious and more controlled. At the same time, Mojtaba Khamenei's reputation inside Iran continued to evolve. He still held no official government position. His name rarely appeared in headlines. He did not give speeches or appear regularly on state television. But among political insiders, the perception remained that his influence was real. Officials seeking access to the Supreme Leader often passed through networks connected to him. Commanders within the Revolutionary Guard were believed to maintain close relationships with his circle. To supporters of the system, this was simply the role of a trusted family member helping manage the affairs of a powerful leader. To critics, however, it reinforced a different image, that of a man exercising significant influence over Iranian politics without ever being publicly accountable to the people. A figure operating not in the spotlight of power, but in its shadow. In Iran, power is rarely limited to politics alone. Behind the formal structure of the state exists another system, a network of economic institutions, business interests, and financial organizations closely tied to the country's ruling elite. Over the years, this network has grown into a powerful economic sphere that stretches across multiple sectors of Iran's economy. Construction companies, investment funds, banks, industrial conglomerates. Many of these organizations are linked directly or indirectly to institutions controlled by the state or by groups close to the Revolutionary Guard. Within this environment, reports began emerging in Western media describing financial networks connected to figures inside Iran's leadership circle. Among the names occasionally mentioned in those reports was Mojtaba Khamenei. His name rarely appeared in official documents or business records, but analysts and investigators suggested that individuals close to him were involved in managing large financial assets across multiple countries. The details of these networks remain difficult to verify, in part because much of Iran's political economy operates behind closed doors. But the broader perception was clear. If Mojtaba Khamenei held influence inside Iran's political system, that influence may also have extended into the country's economic power structure. Over time, the reports surrounding Mojtaba Khamenei's financial influence became more specific. Investigations by international media began pointing to a web of business relationships connected to figures inside Iran's ruling establishment. According to those reports, billions of dollars had moved through networks of insiders, investment groups, and private companies operating both inside Iran and abroad. Mojtaba Khamenei's name was rarely attached directly to these transactions. Instead, the connections often appeared through intermediaries, businessmen, financial institutions, and political allies believed to be close to the leadership of the Islamic Republic. This kind of indirect structure is not unusual in Iran's political economy. Sanctions, international scrutiny, and the complex relationship between government institutions and private companies have often pushed financial activities into opaque networks where ownership is difficult to trace. In this environment, influence can be exercised quietly, through trusted associates, through institutions that operate beyond public visibility, and through a system where political loyalty and economic opportunity are often deeply intertwined. For critics of the regime, these reports reinforced a long-standing suspicion that behind the formal structure of Iran's government exists a parallel world of power, one measured not only in political authority, but in immense financial resources. One episode that drew particular attention to these financial networks involved a major Iranian bank, Bank Ayande. The bank had grown rapidly in the years before its collapse, issuing large loans and financing major development projects. But by the early 2020s, Iranian authorities announced that the institution had effectively gone bankrupt. According to reports, the bank had accumulated enormous debts after lending vast sums of money to a small group of insiders. Among the figures connected to the bank's leadership was businessman Ali Ansari, whose financial activities had long been tied to powerful circles inside Iran. Investigations by international media outlets suggested links between Ansari and networks believed to be close to Mojtaba Khamenei. Neither Mojtaba nor Ansari publicly addressed those allegations, but the collapse of the bank had real consequences. As the state stepped in to manage the financial fallout, the crisis pushed Iran's already severe inflation even higher, making everyday life more difficult for millions of ordinary Iranians. Even if Mojtaba Khamenei has influence inside Iran's political system, there remains one major obstacle standing in his way: religion. The Islamic Republic is not only a political state, it is a religious one, and the position of Supreme Leader was designed to be held by one of the most senior clerics in the Shiite world. Traditionally, that means someone with the rank of Ayatollah, a scholar recognized for deep religious authority and decades of study in Islamic jurisprudence. Mojtaba Khamenei does not hold that rank. Instead, he carries the title Hojjatul Islam, a mid-level clerical position that places him below the highest religious authorities in Iran. For some critics, this raises serious questions. How could someone without the highest level of religious credentials become the spiritual and political leader of the Islamic Republic? Yet, supporters of Mojtaba point to a historical detail that complicates the debate, because Iran has faced this exact situation before. When Ali Khamenei himself became supreme leader in 1989, he was not yet an Ayatollah either. At the time, the country's leadership made a decision that would shape the future of Iran. They changed the rules. The question of religious rank may sound like a serious barrier, but Iran's political history shows that the system can be more flexible than it first appears. When Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, died in 1989, the country suddenly faced the same dilemma it faces today. Who should replace the supreme leader? At the time, Ali Khamenei was serving as Iran's president. He was a prominent revolutionary figure, but like his son today, he did not hold the highest religious rank required for the position. Technically, he was not yet an Ayatollah. Yet, within the leadership of the Islamic Republic, there was strong support for him to take over the role. Rather than selecting a different cleric, the system adapted. Iran's constitution was amended, lowering the religious requirements for the position of supreme leader. That change allowed Ali Khamenei to assume the role, a position he would hold for more than 3 decades. Today, that decision still echoes through Iranian politics, because if the rules were adjusted once before, they could be adjusted again. With the sudden death of the supreme leader, Iran's political system must move quickly to prevent a power vacuum. The country's constitution provides a temporary solution. Until a new supreme leader is chosen, authority is transferred to an interim leadership council. This council is composed of 3 senior figures within the Iranian state: a representative from the religious establishment, the head of the judiciary, and the president of the republic. Together, they assume responsibility for managing the country's leadership during the transition. Their role is not to rule permanently. Instead, they serve as caretakers, ensuring that the machinery of the state continues to function while the process of selecting a new leader begins. That decision ultimately belongs to the Assembly of Experts, an 88-member body of clerics tasked with choosing Iran's supreme leader. In theory, the assembly gathers, debates possible candidates, and votes on the man they believe is most capable of guiding the Islamic Republic. But in reality, the process is often far more complex. Behind closed doors, powerful institutions weigh in. Senior clerics argue their positions. Military leaders consider the strategic future of the country. And in moments of crisis, especially during war, the pressure to choose quickly can be enormous. Somewhere inside these deliberations, the question that first emerged on the night of the strike continues to linger. Could the next supreme leader of Iran be the son of the last one? If Mojtaba Khamenei were to become the next supreme leader, the decision would carry enormous symbolic weight, because the Islamic Republic was born from a revolution that rejected hereditary rule. In 1979, millions of Iranians rose up against the monarchy of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. One of the central criticisms of that system was that power had become concentrated within a single family. The revolution promised something different, a political system built on religious authority and revolutionary legitimacy, not dynasty. For decades, Iran's leaders insisted that the Islamic Republic was fundamentally different from the monarchy it replaced. But if the son of the current supreme leader were to inherit the same position, many critics argue that distinction would become harder to defend. Supporters of Mojtaba Khamenei see the situation very differently. To them, this is not about family inheritance, it is about continuity and stability during a moment of national danger. Iran is facing economic pressure, international sanctions, and the possibility of escalating military conflict. In such circumstances, they argue, choosing someone deeply familiar with the system, someone trusted by the Revolutionary Guard and the country's political leadership, could help prevent instability at the very top of the state. The debate reflects a deeper question that has followed the Islamic Republic for decades. Is the system truly governed by institutions and ideology, or is power ultimately concentrated within a small circle of individuals and families who have shaped Iran's political life since the revolution? The answer to that question may soon determine the future direction of the country. For decades, Mojtaba Khamenei has lived closer to power than almost anyone in Iran, and yet he has remained almost invisible. Unlike many political figures in the Islamic Republic, he does not regularly appear on television. He rarely delivers public sermons. Interviews with the press are virtually non-existent. In a country where speeches by senior clerics are broadcast across the nation, many ordinary Iranians have never even heard his voice. Still, within the inner circles of the Islamic Republic, his presence has long been understood. A man who grew up inside the revolution, a cleric shaped by war, a figure connected to the networks of security, religion, and politics that sustain Iran's ruling system. Now, with the death of the supreme leader and the country facing one of the most uncertain moments in its modern history, that quiet figure may be moving closer to the center of power than ever before. And if Mojtaba Khamenei ultimately becomes Iran's next supreme leader, the future of the Islamic Republic may soon be shaped by a man the world has barely seen.